Walk into almost any American home. Open a kitchen drawer. You'll probably find a coffee maker, phone charger, television remote, maybe a power drill sitting in the garage, or a toy hidden beneath the couch. Now pick up any one of them. Turn it over. There's a good chance you'll see the same 3 words. Made in China. Most people don't even notice them anymore. The label has become part of everyday life. As ordinary as a barcode. As forgettable as the instruction manual still sitting inside the box. But here's something strange. For years, the United States has been trying to reduce its dependence on Chinese manufacturing. Beginning in 2018, Washington imposed tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars worth of Chinese imports. The goal was simple: make Chinese goods more expensive. Encourage companies to manufacture somewhere else. Bring supply chains closer to home. On paper. Sounded like a solid plan. And for a while, the headlines seemed to agree. Factories were opening in Vietnam. India was attracting global manufacturers. Mexico was becoming one of America's fastest-growing industrial partners. Experts started asking the same question. Had China's manufacturing dominance finally reached its end? Certainly looked that way. Why? Years later, do millions of products sold across the United States still depend on China? Not just smartphones. Not just laptops. Everything from kitchen appliances and medical equipment to children's toys and household tools continues to trace part of its journey back there. At first glance, the answer seems obvious. China is cheaper. That's what most people believe. It's also where this story begins to fall apart. Because today, several countries can manufacture certain products for lower labor costs than China. If cheap workers were the only advantage, global companies would have packed up and left years ago. Many tried. Some successfully expanded into other countries. But very few completely walked away. Why? Because they discovered they weren't trying to replace a factory. They were trying to replace something much bigger. Something almost invisible. A manufacturing ecosystem built over decades. And once you understand what that really means, you'll never look at the words "made in China" the same way again. Most people imagine manufacturing as one giant building. Rows of machines. Thousands of workers. Products moving down conveyor belts before being packed into shipping containers. Reality is far more complex. Think about a modern smartphone. Its processor may be designed in the United States. Its advanced chips manufactured in Taiwan. Its memory supplied by South Korea. Its camera components produced in Japan. Rare earth minerals refined in China. Final assembly completed somewhere else. By the time that phone reaches your hand, it has already traveled through one of the most sophisticated industrial networks ever created. That network didn't appear overnight. Took decades to build. Which raises an even bigger question. Who built it? The answer isn't Apple. It isn't Walmart. And it isn't the Chinese factories you've probably heard about. To understand how this system really began, we have to travel back almost half a century. Back to a country that looked nothing like modern China. A country where millions of people still lived in poverty. Where farmland stretched further than factories. Where the city that would one day manufacture products for the entire world was little more than a quiet fishing town. Its name was Shenzhen. And in 1978, one decision made there quietly changed the course of the global economy. Almost nobody noticed it at the time. Today, nearly every household on the planet lives with its consequences. And that's where our story really begins. In 1978, China wasn't the economic superpower we know today. It wasn't building iPhones. It wasn't filling Walmart's shelves. And it certainly wasn't called the world's factory. For decades, China's economy had remained largely closed to the outside world. Most factories produced for domestic needs. Foreign investment was almost non-existent. Millions of people still lived in poverty. If someone had predicted that China would one day manufacture more goods than any country in history, most economists would have dismissed the idea. But history has a habit of changing when one person asks a different question. That person was Deng Xiaoping. When Deng became China's paramount leader, he inherited a country facing enormous economic challenges. Many leaders would have responded with another grand national plan. Deng chose something much riskier, an experiment. He believed China didn't need to prove an ideology. It needed to improve people's lives. A famous saying often linked to Deng captured that philosophy perfectly. It doesn't matter whether a cat is black or white, as long as it catches mice. In other words, results mattered more than theory. Instead of transforming the entire country overnight, he decided to test a new economic model in one small place. That place was Shenzhen. At the time, Shenzhen was hardly the obvious choice. It wasn't Beijing. It wasn't Shanghai. It wasn't even an important Chinese city. It was a quiet fishing town with a population of roughly 300,000 people, sitting just across the border from Hong Kong. And that border changed everything. While Shenzhen remained largely undeveloped, Hong Kong had already become one of Asia's busiest financial and trading centers. International companies knew Hong Kong. Global banks operated there. Ships from around the world filled its ports. Deng saw an opportunity. If China wanted to learn how global business worked, there was no better classroom than the city next door. So in 1980, Shenzhen became China's first special economic zone, or SEZ. Think of it as an economic laboratory. Inside Shenzhen, the rules were different. Foreign companies could invest more easily. Businesses received tax incentives. Export procedures became faster. Government restrictions were reduced. Nobody knew if the experiment would work. Even many Chinese officials were skeptical. Foreign investors were cautious too. China had little experience working with international businesses. Its infrastructure was limited. Its legal system was unfamiliar. The risks were real. Slowly, the first companies arrived. Not because Shenzhen was perfect, because it offered something they hadn't seen before: the freedom to grow. The first factories didn't build advanced electronics. They produced simple products: shoes, plastic toys, basic household goods, textiles. Nothing that looked revolutionary. But something extraordinary was happening behind the scenes. Each factory attracted another supplier. A company making cardboard boxes opened nearby. Then a plastics manufacturer. Then businesses producing metal components. Packaging companies arrived. Logistics firms followed. Machine repair workshops appeared. One successful factory created opportunities for 10 more. Without anyone fully planning it, an industrial ecosystem was beginning to take shape. And every new company made Shenzhen more valuable than it had been the month before. By the late 1980s, the city was changing almost faster than maps could keep up. Roads stretched across former farmland. Apartment buildings replaced fishing villages. Construction cranes became part of the skyline. Workers traveled from every corner of China, believing Shenzhen offered something their hometowns couldn't: future. Then came the moment that changed everything. The world's biggest companies stopped seeing China as a place to save money, and started seeing it as the best place to build. That single shift would transform businesses like Apple, Walmart, Dell, HP, and Nike. But none of them realized they were about to become part of the greatest manufacturing story of the modern era. Because in just a few years, one international decision would open China's doors wider than ever before. And once that happened, there was no turning back. On December 11, 2001, China officially joined the World Trade Organization. To most people, it sounded like another political announcement. Few signatures, few speeches, another meeting between government officials. But inside boardrooms across America, Europe, and Asia, Executives were paying very close attention. Because this wasn't just about trade. It was about certainty. For years, many international companies wanted to expand in China. But building a factory costs billions. No CEO wants to invest that kind of money unless the rules are stable. Joining the WTO changed that. It meant China was becoming part of the global trading system. The risk suddenly looked much smaller. The opportunity looked enormous. And the timing couldn't have been better. The world was changing. Families wanted personal computers. Businesses needed faster technology. The internet was entering millions of homes. Then came digital cameras, flat-screen televisions, gaming consoles, and before long, smartphones. Global demand exploded. Companies needed somewhere that could build millions of products, without sacrificing quality, without missing deadlines, and without doubling the price. China had spent more than 20 years quietly preparing for exactly that moment. But here's where most people misunderstand the story. They assume companies chose China because wages were low. Low labor costs helped. But they weren't the reason companies stayed. The real advantage was something much harder to copy. Speed. Imagine you're launching a new smartphone. Everything is ready. Then, 2 weeks before production begins, your engineers discover a problem. One tiny component isn't working properly. You need a replacement immediately. In many countries, that could delay production for months. New suppliers must be found, contracts signed, parts shipped across borders, factories reconfigured. Now imagine the same problem inside Shenzhen. The supplier making the new component is 20 minutes away. The company producing the screws is in the next industrial district. The factory making the packaging is already waiting. The trucks arrive the same afternoon. Production resumes almost immediately. That's not because one factory is faster. It's because thousands of businesses are working together like one giant machine. Former Apple executives have repeatedly explained that this concentration of suppliers, engineers, and skilled manufacturing workers became one of China's greatest strengths. It wasn't simply about assembling products. It was about solving problems faster than almost anyone else. Then there was Foxconn. Most people have never heard the name. Yet chances are, you've held something it helped build. Foxconn became Apple's largest manufacturing partner and grew into one of the biggest electronics manufacturers in the world. Some of its campuses employed hundreds of thousands of workers. They weren't just factories. They operated almost like self-contained cities. Housing, restaurants, medical clinics, transport, training centers. Everything designed to keep production moving every hour of every day. Apple wasn't the only company taking notice. Walmart dramatically expanded its supplier network. Dell increased manufacturing. HP did the same. Nike, Adidas, Lego. Countless global brands built critical parts of their supply chains around China. Consumers rarely noticed. They simply walked into a store, picked up a product, and assumed it had always been that easy. It hadn't. Behind every finished product stood an invisible network of suppliers stretching across entire regions. By the mid-2010s, China was producing around 28% of the world's manufacturing output, more than any other country. It wasn't just the world's factory anymore. It had become the center of a manufacturing ecosystem unlike anything modern history had seen. But success came with consequences. As China's economy grew, so did wages. Factory workers earned more. Land prices increased. Operating costs climbed. Suddenly, the question that had once seemed impossible was being asked in boardrooms around the world. What if it's time to leave China? Economists believed the answer was obvious. History suggested manufacturing always moved to wherever labor became cheaper. Many predicted the next global factory would simply replace the last one. On paper, that made perfect sense. In reality, it didn't happen. Because companies soon discovered something no spreadsheet had fully captured. They weren't trying to replace one country. They were trying to replace decades of relationships, millions of skilled workers, thousands of suppliers, and one of the most efficient industrial ecosystems ever created. That realization changed everything. And when the United States launched a trade war against China in 2018, the world was about to find out just how difficult that replacement would be. When the United States imposed sweeping tariffs in 2018, many people believed they already knew how the story would end. Factories would close. Production would move. China would slowly lose its position as the world's manufacturing center. The headlines seemed to support that idea. Global companies announced new investments in Vietnam. India launched ambitious manufacturing programs to attract electronics companies. Mexico became one of the fastest-growing destinations for factories serving the American market. It looked like the beginning of a manufacturing migration. But behind those headlines, something very different was happening. Companies weren't abandoning China. They were protecting themselves. The strategy even got a name: China Plus One. Instead of depending entirely on one country, businesses began adding another. An electronics company might assemble products in India, open a second factory in Vietnam, or build a distribution center in Mexico. But China often remained at the center of the network. Not because executives ignored the tariffs. Because replacing an ecosystem built over 4 decades proved far harder than replacing a single factory. Apple is one of the clearest examples. In recent years, Apple has significantly expanded iPhone assembly in India. That decision made headlines around the world. Many people immediately concluded, Apple is leaving China. The reality is more complicated. While more iPhones are now assembled in India than ever before, many of the specialized components, precision tools and supplier relationships that support Apple's production remain deeply connected to China. Industry analysts often describe this as diversification rather than departure. Apple isn't simply moving from one country to another. It's gradually building additional manufacturing capacity while still relying on a network that took decades to develop. The same pattern appeared across dozens of industries: medical devices, home appliances, industrial machinery, electric vehicles, consumer electronics. Production became more geographically diverse, but the supply chain remained globally connected. Then another challenge changed the conversation: the COVID-19 pandemic. For the first time in decades, companies saw what happened when factories, ports, and transport networks stopped at the same time. Products disappeared from shelves. Shipping costs surged. Delivery times stretched from weeks into months. Businesses realized that efficiency alone wasn't enough. Resilience mattered too. That experience accelerated 2 new ideas: nearshoring, manufacturing closer to customers. For many American companies, that meant expanding in Mexico. And friendshoring, building supply chains with countries seen as trusted economic and political partners. These strategies are reshaping global manufacturing today. India is becoming one of the world's fastest-growing electronics manufacturing hubs. Vietnam has emerged as a major exporter of consumer goods. Mexico continues to attract record investment because of its close access to the United States. But none of these countries has replaced China by itself. The global manufacturing map is becoming more distributed, more balanced, yet still remarkably interconnected. And that may be the biggest surprise of all. The story was never about one country winning and another losing. It was about how global manufacturing evolved. Today, a single product can be designed in California, powered by chips manufactured in Taiwan, use memory from South Korea, contain minerals refined in China, be assembled in India, and finally arrive on a doorstep in New York. That's no longer unusual. It's normal. Because the modern economy isn't built by one nation. It's built by thousands of companies working across dozens of countries at the same time. Which brings us back to those three simple words. Made in China. First, they look like nothing more than a country of origin label. But now you know there's something else. They're a reminder of a decision made in 1978. An experiment that began in a small fishing town called Shenzhen. A manufacturing ecosystem built over more than 40 years. And a global supply chain so deeply connected that even the world's largest economy couldn't replace it overnight. Will China remain the world's manufacturing center forever? Probably not. History tells us that no economic dominance lasts forever. New manufacturing hubs are already rising. India, Vietnam, Mexico, and others will follow. But they won't replace China the way many people imagined. They'll grow alongside it, creating a more diversified global manufacturing network. So the next time you pick up a phone charger, coffee maker, or a television remote, turn it over. If you still see those familiar words, made in China, you'll understand that they don't simply tell you where a product was assembled. They tell the story of one of the greatest economic transformations in modern history. A story that began with one experiment, spread across the world, and quietly changed the way every one of us lives. Because in the end, America didn't discover that replacing China was impossible. It discovered that the modern world had become too connected for any one country to simply walk away. And perhaps, that's the most important lesson of all.